Thank you, Kirk. That was lovely. Next up, we have our featured reader celebrating the release of his new book, Correspondence in D Minor. James R. Dennis is a novelist, a poet, and a Dominican friar. Along with two friends, he is a co-author of the Miles mystery series. He also writes and teaches on spiritual matters. He was born in West Texas and lives in San Antonio with his two ill-behaved dogs. He will be reading from Correspondence in D Minor, available for sale on the back table, his new collection of poems, many of which are written as fictional letters to or from figures from literature, history, and scripture. Ladies and gentlemen, James R.
Thanks, and thanks to all of you for showing up. It would have been real weird if it was just me and Kurt up here. The first poem I'd like to read is a snippet of it on the cover of the book. It's called About These Messages. And it has its genesis back in the late 70s when I was at the University of Texas, ironically studying the philosophy of language. I don't think I knew it was ironic at the time. I had an answering machine, but it had a garbled tape in it. And so I would get these little snippets of things that people wanted to tell me, but I was pretty clear that what I was hearing wasn't what they were saying. So about these messages. I remember a drizzling rain the third time I saw that guy, that far-fetched fellow, and he gave me his phone number. He told me never to call if the sun wasn't shining, leading me to wonder exactly what he meant. I thought he intended to say he wouldn't be home in the evenings, but he was talking about these daily rains that we've been having around 9 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon. And just as I was leaving, the dim light fell through my kitchen window and spread across the floor as my beloved might spread across a Turkish bath. And I lost my train of thought. Yesterday the word came to me that I should go to Nineveh and warn them of the consequences of the aftermath that would surely follow. Upon my arrival, however, they announced I was no sight for sore eyes. Beginning the journey back home, I learned that the library in Alexandria had been destroyed by fire, a universe of books and scrolls within which we sought to gather and systematize all that was known or knowable, and I wept. A childhood friend sent me a letter to inform me that my secret identity has been revealed and I have been betrayed. I do not know my adversaries. I do not know their numbers or their names. That information was not conveyed. The smartest people in the world have announced that our weather is changing, that we should expect a more extreme climate, but I suspect we won't. You could set your watch by these rains that we've been having, but most of the people I know and most of the people they know don't. I don't understand these messages at all. I have listened for some hidden communique within the squawk of the emergency broadcast system. I assume it's there. I'll go along to get along. But I think we should use another language for a while and then come back to our native tongue for the rites of birth and burial and to teach our children right from wrong. This next poem is a Villanelle, which is a poetic form that occurred in the 16th century. And it's one of the letter poems. It was written to John Donne, one of my favorite poets, one of the English metaphysical poets. So it's called a Villanelle on the Day of Your Death. By the way, Donne famously wrote the line, "Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for you." John, I think of you often, the thinking is never quite done. I remember our time together, that mad metaphysical time. It's Holy Week here, and the work has only begun. I hope you know the holy sonnets have had a good run. I remember them whenever I hear the church bells chime. You told me, and now the tolling is never quite done. The facile ideas were the ones that you shunned. For us, it's much harder. I'm writing, but only part-time. It's Holy Week here, and the work has only begun. I'll avoid the easy play upon the easy word and shun the pun. That's a slippery slope up which I shall not climb during Sanctum Sabbati, while the work has only begun. Of all those who wrote beneath an English sun, I miss you the most. Your death has reduced the depth of time, but we remember you often. The remembering is never quite done, especially in Holy Week, when the work has just begun. The next poem is another letter poem written to Trotsky, and the epigraph is from Trotsky. Insurrection is an art, and like all art, it has its own laws. You don't know me, but we have a good deal in common. Although I never knew Lenin, like you, I would never have trusted Stalin. You and I were both educated in Odessa, and while I was never in prison there, I did kind of make a mess of things. We both appreciate the working man, the plight of those who feed their families through common work with common hands. I have also spent time in London. While I was there for vacation and you, having fled Siberia, were in exile. Like you, I might have been compelled to action when the palace guard slaughtered good, decent, hungry people on Bloody Sunday, and might have made the same decision. I admire the photographs of you during these years, pointed, intense, full of passion and determination. All these events make clear that in another time we might have been friends, until 1918 or so. It's hard to overlook the bloodbath thereafter, hard to see beyond the violence. I'm a peacenik down deep, you see. And we must part ways when you euphemize and hint at tearing away or chopping off the bourgeoisie. Even you, as committed as you were, could not ignore the pain, the blood, the prisons, the labor camps, which you yourself brought about. You had to see that riding through history on a black Bolshevik train, even if you were not involved in the slaughter of the children of the Tsar. That kind of rhetoric can lead to that kind of thing, things being as things are. Like you, I might have fallen for Frida had I been on the lam, and after a torrid affair, she would probably have called me the old man too. Anyway, we both had our adventures in Mexico. I, however, was never so deeply concerned about dialectical materialism. But Mexico, it sounds so simple. I may have to go back. Simple, except for that evening on the Avenida Vienna, when that wretched assassin Ramon Mercader planted an ice axe deep within your cabeza. I still hope that in that land of matadors and cathedrals and chiles, you might have moderated your tone, softened your views on a lifetime worth of these historical necessities. I'm going to grab something to drink real quickly, excuse me. One should never end poetry doing that. So this next poem, I think probably a lot of us have had some experience with this event. It's called Technology. My computer will not communicate with the printer, leading me to wonder if I have stumbled upon some ancient squabble, some blood feud that arose long ago before I knew either of them. This could result in years of complicated legal proceedings. The trouble might be of a political nature, arising from an anarchist pistol shot, and all the accessories will click into place, alliances based on geography and familial collaborations. Perhaps this is only the spark that will spread to all my electronics, and maybe even the appliances I have bought. This could have arisen from some sort of religious failing. Like Zechariah, the computer has been struck dumb for disregarding its better angels. And now, against a firewall, they are all wailing. Or possibly, this conflict springs from a romance gone wrong. The computer overheard the printer whispering to the scanner in a hushed and tender voice, ignoring her betrothal, forgetting to whom she belonged. And now, they will not speak at all. They will not share their ones and zeros, and I am caught between them as they shout insults and mock each other here on the hot gates of this electronic Thermopylae. But I find no Xerxes and no Leonidas here. On this battlefield there are no heroes. Perhaps, after giving in time and time again to the computer's caprice, after years of oppression and doing the digital heavy lifting around here, the printer has risen up in some sort of Marxist revolution, and the sullen device murmurs, "No justice, no peace." This next poem is called Fallen. And it was originally written to sort of deal with what it was like to get kicked out of the Garden of Eden from Adam's perspective. And over time, however, I've begun to think of it as a kind of a prayer for all refugees, wherever they are. The epigraph is from the book of Genesis. "You may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat." Whatever the regulations or the guidelines were, we disregarded them. I can't even remember what it was, perhaps something to do with produce, or vegetation, or trees, or whatever. The facts are resistant to our recollection. And now we wander, refugees of a sort, with sacks on our backs, carrying not our belongings, but our regret. And I'm not sure we'll ever find the way home. We carry the burden of an intimacy disentangled, finding this new knowledge a little less than ken, a little less than kind. Compelled to travel crowded not into a smaller place, but a much larger geography. There is plenty of land here, but so little room to maneuver. This next poem is a sonnet, and just one of several poems in this collection that will ultimately get me defrocked and probably excommunicated too. I've always wondered about the story of Isaac and his father, which is taken as sort of a story of the faith of Abraham, who did exactly what God told him to do. But Scripture never tells us much about their relationship after that event. And how exactly did Isaac view his dad thereafter? And so I tried to address that feeling. Isaac to his father: "Let's talk about the elephant in the room, Pops." About that afternoon, me happily carrying a bundle of wood. I can still hear it, the rough crunch of rocks under our feet, flesh of your flesh, blood of your blood. So long ago the years have sipped away my strength like good wine and clouded my eyes, but I recall with mathematical precision the length of that walk, the stark, bright sun, the bitter echo of my cries. I wanted you to save me, to spare me, but you had something else in mind. The sacrifice, you see, does not see a priest. The sacrifice sees a butcher. From my viewpoint, this single-minded obedience was a bit less than kind. At that moment, I set all questions of parenting aside, both nature and nurture. As we climbed, you might have shared that my tents would soon be past. The Lord will provide the lamb my ass. This next poem was written for one of my favorite actors in my childhood, who was in the Warner Brothers studio system for years, and as the poem imagines his life before he became a studio property. By the way, it is my understanding that despite all of his work with the studio, he was never paid a dime. It's called Elegy for Elmer. Before he came to Hollywood with a suitcase full of dreams, a bulbous nose and his thespian schemes, before he left his hometown, before the lonely bus ride out of Pittsburgh, before the classes in Hell's Kitchen where he studied under Strasberg, before the hunting jacket and the shotgun blast combined to render him a bad punchline, a goofball in a duck blind, before he spiraled down, before the studio insist he see a doctor, before his pathological insistence on singing the music of Richard Wagner, before the torrid affair with a starlet, before the dimming of his art, before he became a laughing stock which broke his whittle heart, before the women and the booze and pills and the scandal sheets, the lesser parts, the cut-rate scripts, and 1,000 surreptitious retreats, before squandering his poor talents on unspeakable acts of decadence. He was just a kid with a speech impediment. I admire this next poem simply for its, I suppose from a Darwinian perspective, most of the love poems I've ever tried to write ended up exactly where they belonged, in the trash can. This one somehow survived. It's called Letter to a Russian Jew. If you return, would you go for a walk with me while the evening falls around us, cool and familiar, like a fine satin sheet? We could amble through the park by the Astromeria or drive to the cafe on cobblestone streets. We could go to the Garden of Eden and rename all the beasts. I hear the fresh produce there is great. It all depends upon your mood. If you prefer, we could take the train to Tunisia and sleep late. There in the land of Berbers, we could go down to the sea. We could take our coffee at mid-morning and watch the light darting through the alleys. In Bizerte, they make cakes with geranium water. I remember laughing at the waiter with a notorious overbite. We might make our way to Zambia, wearing khakis and sunglasses, and watch the birds at sunset. I've thought of all the landmarks. I remember them all. I remember the crocodile and recall the egret. Down the Zambezi River, we might hunt for your perfect day. I am certain it still remains. Or we could go for a drive across the Serengeti scrub on the African plains. You might rather go to Rome and taste the tomatoes and olives. We could look for signs of the martyrs in the ruins of stone. There is something so Baroque about the evenings there. At the center lies the Mediterranean weather and the Papal Dome. We could return to the Sangre de Cristo Mountains and tell ghost stories, or linger in the bakery after lunch when the plates are taken away. They say the pastries whisper about politics when everyone is gone. They discuss the news, the rumors, and the remnants of the day. We could ponder Jane Goodall's study of the chimps, or pass an entire afternoon in 3 chess moves. We could talk about polio, or the Alamo, or the villainy of Cossacks. We might speak of chemistry, or of mysteries, or of things to improve. In your absence, I have heard the wind in the chimes, and seen the boats in the moonlight. It has been too long, old friend, but I cannot forget, and I cannot squeeze any more from my recollections, try as I might. I remember your smile, sometimes ambrosial and sometimes obscure, and if you come back, I promise to never again use any literary lure. We could sail to Crete or hike in the Alps, watch the horses in Kentucky, or examine the temples in Kathmandu. I leave this to your discretion. I do not care where we go. I do not care what we do. And this last poem is the last poem in the collection. It's called A Simple Poem. This is a simple poem. It shuns complications. I use the term complications in the medical sense, an adverse reaction to a procedure, a foreign substance, or an event. This is a religious poem. Reciting the liturgy of the hours, each syllable calls out for holiness. This poem has taken vows of poverty, purity, and obedience. This is an English poem, by which I don't mean the language, which is obvious. Rather, I mean its respect for Her Majesty, the Union Jack, and its gin-soaked dreams of an empire gone by. Within this poem, you will find yourself lost in a wilderness of superstition, conspiracy theories, gypsy curses, horseshoes, astrology, a witching wand, and protections from the evil eye. This poem has soporific qualities. It will combat the sleeplessness we encounter, and the night terrors too. Like poppies, it lulls us, it compels us to sleep, sleep, sleep. This is a seductive poem. The words hang a little too loosely, cling to the page a little too tightly, and wind themselves around you as though they could fulfill your deepest needs. This is a disappointing poem. While early on it may have shown some potential, it will not rise to the level of our expectations. This poem is full of patriotic fervor. It beats the martial drum, increases defense spending, parades about in uniform, it fulminates and growls at the poems of other nations. This poem is creepy. Not like a horror movie or a pandemic, more like a stranger you catch a glimpse of 3 times in the same day, almost out of sight. This poem has been following me and following you. This is a musical poem, singing scat into a moonless Harlem night. This poem improvises on a theme, howling a lonesome doobie doobie doo. This poem has been involved with the Cosa Nostra, the Black Hand, the mob, This poem will make you an offer you cannot refuse. It will smile wryly through wine-stained teeth and call you paisan. This poem is a liar. You will not find the love of the truth on these pages. This poem feigns indifference, as though it will not miss you when you are gone. Thank you.